I grew up believing my dad was gone. My mom told me he died in a house fire when I was just 2, and from that day forward, she never said his name again. Not once. For 25 years, that silence sat inside me like a scar I couldn't see but could always feel. Then, last month, everything shifted. It didn't start with some big revelation. It started with something completely ordinary. I was donating blood at a mobile clinic parked outside a grocery store in Austin, Texas. I figured I was just doing my part, a small act of kindness. A week later, my phone rang. The person on the other end spoke calmly, but there was a weight in their voice I couldn't ignore. They said my blood work showed an unusual marker. Instead of explaining it medically, they gave me an address in New York and told me I needed to go there. I had no clue why. I'd never been to New York. I didn't know anyone there. But the tone of their voice left me with this uneasy feeling that saying no wasn't an option. So I went online, bought a ticket, and packed a single backpack. I boarded that plane carrying nothing but questions and a growing sense that something huge was waiting on the other side. When I finally stood outside the door at that address, I couldn't have guessed how completely my life was about to unravel. The door opened, and a man stood there holding a mug of coffee. His eyes met mine. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. For a second, everything went still. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. His lips trembled before he whispered one word. My name is Logan Pierce, and silence has shaped most of my life. I was raised in Austin, Texas, by my mom, Marissa Pierce, a woman tougher than just about anyone I've ever met. She's the kind of person who doesn't let life beat her down, no matter how rough it gets. She worked as a nurse, long hours that left her drained but never defeated. She carried herself with quiet strength. And while she gave me love and a stable home, she also built walls, high, unshakable walls, that I was never allowed to climb. Those walls surrounded my father. For as long as I can remember, he was more of a shadow than a man. Mom told me he died in a fire when I was 2. That was all she ever said. No pictures, no bedtime stories, no hidden letters or keepsakes. Just the cold finality of he's gone. The way she said it made it clear that asking again was off limits. So I didn't. When I hit my teens, that silence started to make me angry. I wanted answers, but she never gave them. By the time I was grown, I'd learned to carry that missing piece quietly, convincing myself that pushing her would only cause pain. Our little apartment in Austin was modest but homey. Mom made sure I never felt poor, though I noticed how carefully she handled money. The furniture was plain, the meals simple, and every decision she made came from someone who understood what it meant to go without. Yet, I never once doubted her love. She made every birthday special and every Christmas count, even when the gifts were small. She was my anchor. I always knew she loved me deeply. But love tied to secrets has a way of getting heavy. Growing up, I looked for traces of my father in myself because half of me was a mystery. Mom and I shared the same dark hair and brown eyes, but sometimes I'd catch my reflection and wonder, what came from him? Did he laugh the same way? Was he restless like me, always tinkering with things that didn't even need fixing, just to keep his hands busy? Those questions grew into a quiet hunger I tried to smother with school, friends, and eventually, work. By 27, I'd built a life that looked stable from the outside. I worked as a mechanic in a small shop on the edge of town. I was good at it, not just because I understood engines, but because fixing things gave me peace. Machines made sense. If something broke, there was always a reason, always a way to put it right. People weren't like that. Families weren't like that. Still, that silence about my father never left me. It seeped into conversations with friends who talked about their dads, about fishing trips, arguments, and lessons learned. It made me feel like I was standing on the outside of something everyone else had. I dated, but I never really settled down. I couldn't picture being a father when half of me came from a man I knew nothing about. When I was 20, I tried asking again. I remember sitting at the kitchen table while Mom was still in her scrubs, looking worn out after a long shift. I asked her why we didn't have any pictures of Dad. She froze for a second. Her eyes flickered. Fear, sadness, maybe both. Then she looked back down at her plate and said quietly, "Some things are better left in the past, Logan." That was her way of saying the conversation was over. But the look in her eyes that night stuck with me. It wasn't just grief. It was something heavier, like a secret she'd been carrying too long. I stopped pushing, but the question stayed alive in me, waiting. Even with that silence between us, we were close. When she let her guard down, she could light up a room. She had this warmth that made people trust her instantly. I admired her strength, but sometimes I'd catch her watching me like she was looking at someone else, someone who wasn't entirely me. It was like my face reminded her of a man she couldn't bring herself to talk about. So, I tried to build a life that made sense on my own terms. I worked hard, stayed steady, and earned a reputation for being the reliable one. My friends joked that I was the guy who always had it together. My coworkers trusted me with the tough jobs. On the outside, I looked fine, but inside, something was missing. I told myself it didn't matter that my father was gone, that some things were better left buried. But the truth was simple. No matter how much I tried to move on, I still wanted to know who he was. I wanted to know what kind of man could leave such an empty space behind, whether he was taken by death or chose to disappear. I never could have imagined how the truth would find me. Looking back now, I realized that the silence I grew up with was its own kind of preparation for the day my world would split apart. For years, my life revolved around what I didn't know. That absence shaped me more than any story could have. And when the call came from the clinic, when a stranger gave me an address instead of an explanation, it felt like the first crack in the wall my mother had spent her whole life building. I didn't understand it then, but that crack was about to open everything wide. The day it all began was ordinary, forgettably so. It was a Saturday, and I had the weekend off from the shop. I went grocery shopping that morning, nothing special. As I loaded bags into my car, I noticed a white mobile blood donation bus parked near the entrance. A big red banner stretched across its side, and a volunteer was standing out front handing out flyers. He smiled and said, 15 minutes of your time can save a life. I'd never donated blood before. Honestly, I almost walked away, ready to head home, but something held me there. Maybe it was guilt for never giving back. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was that quiet ache inside me, the one that wanted to feel connected to something bigger than myself. So I nodded, signed the clipboard, and climbed onto the bus. The nurses were friendly, chatting easily as they moved between donors. I sat down, rolled up my sleeve, and tried not to look at the needle. The whole process was simple, fast, nothing dramatic. I walked out with a sticker that said I gave blood today and a free cookie. I figured that was the end of it. A week later, I was under the hood of a pickup at work when my phone rang. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, but I answered anyway. Mr. Pierce, the voice said, calm and professional. This is Dr. Carlton from the Texas Regional Blood Center. I'm calling about your recent donation. Right away, my stomach tightened. I thought maybe they'd found something wrong, some illness I didn't know about. My brain jumped ahead, filling in the blanks before he could. Your results flagged an anomaly, he said. Nothing dangerous, but significant. We recommend you come in to discuss it. What kind of anomaly? I asked. There was a pause. The kind of pause that feels like someone's measuring every word. Mr. Pierce, I can't explain over the phone, he said. What I can do is give you an address in New York. If you're willing to go, I believe you'll find answers there. An address? I repeated. I don't know anyone in New York. Why would I go there? Because the anomaly relates to your family history, he said. That's all I can tell you. Then he gave me the address. I grabbed the nearest receipt and scribbled it down, my hands trembling. That night, I sat across from my mom at the kitchen table. I wanted to confront her, to finally demand the truth. But when I saw how tired she looked, how her eyes seemed to carry years of things unsaid, I froze. I was afraid of what she might admit, and maybe even more afraid of what she wouldn't. So I said nothing. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, where it stayed like a burning secret. The next few days were unbearable. I couldn't concentrate at work. Every time I picked up a wrench, my mind replayed the doctor's words. Answers in New York. My coworkers noticed I wasn't myself, fumbling tools, missing steps. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Was it a medical issue? Some genetic disorder? A hidden relative? Did I have family out there I'd never met? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled out that crumpled receipt, stared at the address again, and knew what I had to do. Before leaving, I called my mom. I wanted to give her one last chance to tell me the truth. She answered on the third ring, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Mom, I need to know, I said. I need to know about Dad. I got a call from the clinic. They gave me an address in New York. Silence. For a long moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then she spoke, her voice tight with fear. "Logan, please don't go. Some doors should stay closed." The words hit hard. They were the same ones she'd used years ago when I asked about photos of my father, the same tone that had shut me out every time. I gripped the phone. "That's exactly why I have to go, Mom. I can't live in silence anymore. I can't pretend half of me doesn't exist." She started to cry, soft, sharp, breaking. "You don't understand," she said between sobs. "I did everything to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I asked, but no answer came. Her crying only grew harder. In that moment, I knew she wasn't going to tell me. Whatever truth she was guarding, it was too heavy for her to release. So I made the decision for both of us. I booked a last-minute flight to New York. I packed light, just a backpack, a few clothes, my wallet, and that piece of paper that felt like it was burning through my pocket. I didn't tell anyone else where I was going. The truth was mine to uncover. As the plane climbed into the night sky, I looked down at the fading lights of Texas. Fear and anticipation twisted together in my chest. Ahead of me was nothing but questions, and maybe, finally, answers. This wasn't just about finding my father anymore. It was about finding myself. My life had been built on silence and half-truths, and I was finally ready to break them apart. The choice to go wasn't sudden. It built slowly, over restless nights and long hours at the shop. Every time I reached into my pocket, I could feel the address there, like a pulse that wouldn't let me forget. Every night, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my mom and watch the fear etched into her face. I could see it in the tightness around her mouth, the way her eyes darted when I asked too many questions. That's when I realized she was never going to open the door to the truth. If I wanted answers, I had to be the one to turn the handle. The morning I bought the ticket, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, toes hanging over. My finger hovered above the purchase button, while every voice in my head screamed for me to stop. New York was far. I had no plan, no family, not even a clear idea of what kind of truth I was chasing. But silence had been my life for 25 years, and I was done living inside it. When I finally pressed that button, the confirmation email hit my inbox like a final verdict. That night, I started packing. The act itself didn't feel real. I rolled up a few shirts, tucked in my toothbrush, phone charger, and that folded piece of paper with the address, like it was some kind of treasure map I didn't know how to read. Every item I packed felt heavier than it should have been, like it already knew the weight of what I was walking toward. Halfway through, I stopped, sat on my bed, and just stared at the walls. They were mostly bare, just a few old posters, and one photo of me and Mom on my high school graduation day. She was smiling, proud, her arm around me like she could hold the world together if she just held on tight enough. I wondered if she'd known this day would come, the day her silence wouldn't be enough to keep me home. Sleep didn't come easy that night. My mind spun in circles, trying to imagine what that address could lead to. Was it a hospital? A research lab? Some distant relative who knew something about the man she never mentioned? By dawn, I'd worked myself into a blur of fear and hope. When I wheeled my backpack into the kitchen, Mom was already there, standing in her robe, hands wrapped around a coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her together. Her eyes were red. She hadn't slept either. "Logan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, don't go." "I have to," I said. My voice came out steady, but inside, I was shaking. She stepped forward and reached for my arm. "You don't understand what you're walking into." "Then tell me," I said quietly. "Tell me what I'm walking into." Her hand dropped. Tears filled her eyes, but she just shook her head. "I can't." The silence between us felt like a canyon. And for the first time, I realized how much of our love was built on things we never said. How fragile that made it. I kissed her cheek, whispered that I loved her, and walked out the door. She didn't try to stop me again. The airport was chaos, suitcases rolling, people hugging, voices echoing through the intercom, but I moved through it like I was underwater. Every step felt like a march towards something irreversible. By the time I was seated by the window, gripping the armrest as the engines roared, I couldn't stop wondering how much of my life would change before I landed. The flight was long, just the hum of the cabin, the chatter of strangers, and my thoughts looping on repeat. I took out the address and stared at it again. 48 Mercer Street, Brooklyn. I searched it on my phone. Nothing. Just a normal street in a normal neighborhood. Somehow, that made me even more uneasy. If this wasn't something official, then it was personal. Deeply personal. As the plane sliced through clouds, I tried to picture the man my mother refused to talk about. I imagined him a dozen different ways. A kind man with tired eyes, a cruel man she'd had to escape, a broken man who'd simply walked away. Every version felt possible. Every version rewrote who I was. The not knowing hollowed me out, but it also kept me moving forward. When the plane touched down at LaGuardia, New York spread out below me like some massive, living thing. Towers of glass, rivers of yellow cabs, crowds that never stopped moving. I felt small in a city that didn't even notice I existed. But the address was still in my pocket, burning like a brand. I checked into a cheap hotel in Brooklyn, the kind of place where the sheets smelled faintly of bleach, and you could hear the next room's TV through the wall. I sat on the bed, staring at my phone, thinking about calling Mom. But I already knew how that call would go. She'd beg me to come home. She'd tell me some doors were better left closed. And I'd tell her I was opening it anyway. So I didn't call. The next morning, I stood outside the hotel, a crumpled piece of paper in one hand, and my heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. I followed my own messy directions through quiet streets until I reached Mercer. It wasn't what I expected. Just brick buildings and little shops. Peaceful. Ordinary. Too ordinary. I stood across the street from number 48 for almost 10 minutes, staring at that door. Plain brown wood, brass numbers nailed slightly crooked. But to me, it was the heaviest door in the world. I wanted to turn around. Pretend this never happened. Go back to Texas, back to safety, back to silence. But then I thought of all the years without a father, all the questions I'd swallowed, and the way Mom's voice had trembled when she begged me not to go. If I walked away now, I'd never forgive myself. So I crossed the street, climbed the steps, raised my fist, and knocked. The decision was made. The door would open, and whatever waited on the other side was going to change everything. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear anything else. The brass numbers above the door seemed to glare down, like they knew exactly what I was about to uncover. I knocked again, harder this time. For a moment, nothing. No sound, no movement. I almost turned to leave, convinced I'd made a mistake. Then I heard footsteps. The door opened, and there he was, a man holding a coffee mug, standing in the doorway like time itself had stopped. His hair was streaked with gray, his shoulders broad but slightly bent, his face carved by years that looked hard. But his eyes, those stopped me cold. They were the same shade of brown as mine. The mug slipped from his hand, shattering against the concrete. He stared at me, mouth open, lips trembling. "Logan," he said, his voice cracking on my name. The world tilted. He knew my name. He knew me. I could hardly breathe. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice rough and unsteady. "I'm Logan." The man's face drained of color. He gripped the doorframe like he needed it to stay upright, the moment clearly too heavy to stand on its own. His eyes filled with tears, and in a trembling whisper, barely more than breath, he said, "My son." My knees went weak. A rush of anger and longing collided in my chest, so hard it almost knocked the air out of me. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, how it might happen, what I'd say, but none of those versions came close to this. The man I'd been told was dead stood right in front of me, alive. "You're supposed to be dead," I blurted out before I could stop myself. His face twisted with something between pain and guilt. He stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. "Please," he said quietly. "Let me explain." I hesitated in the doorway, fists clenched, every instinct screaming at me to demand answers right then and there. But there was something in his eyes, shame, desperation, love, that pulled me forward. I stepped inside. The apartment was small and cluttered, filled with books, stacks of paper, and the faint smell of old coffee. I dropped down onto a worn couch while he slowly lowered himself into the chair across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke. He just looked at me, tears sliding down his face. Finally, he said, "I'm Victor Hale. I'm your father." The words hit like a brick to the chest. I wanted to tell him I already knew, that the blood in me had recognized him the second I saw his face. But I stayed quiet and let him keep talking. "I didn't die in that fire," he said softly. "I made it out. But living through it didn't mean the danger was over. Back then, I was caught up in things I never should have touched, people I owed, threats that reached into our home. The fire wasn't an accident. It was meant to kill me. When it didn't, I knew staying would put you and your mother in danger. He took a shaky breath. So I left. I disappeared to protect you. My stomach turned. His words felt like both a lifeline and a knife. I thought of my mother working double shifts to keep us afloat, carrying all that silence alone. I thought about birthdays without him, nights I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering who I really was. You let me grow up thinking you were dead, I said, my voice sharp and trembling. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it did to her? Victor lowered his head. Every single day, Logan, he said quietly. Not one day passed that I didn't think about you. But if I had come back, they would have found you. I had to make a choice, and I chose to protect you, even if it meant you'd grow up hating me. The anger inside me flared. You could have told me the truth later. You could have written a letter, something. I shook my head. Instead, I grew up with nothing. Do you know how many times I asked Mom about you? How many times she cried and said some things are better left in the past? His shoulders trembled. For the first time, I saw him not as the strong man I'd once imagined, but as someone who'd been broken, living in exile from his own family, crushed by his choices. You're right, he said finally, his voice just above a whisper. I failed you. I failed both of you. But I'm here now, and I'll answer every question you have. If you want to walk away after that, I won't stop you. Just let me tell you everything first. I leaned back, my hands shaking. The fury didn't vanish, but underneath it something began to stir. For years I'd felt incomplete, like I was missing half of myself. And now, for the first time, that missing piece flickered into view. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something I'd never had before, the truth. Victor leaned forward, his voice steady now. Logan, I never stopped loving you. Every sacrifice I made was for you. Seeing you here, alive, grown, strong, that's more than I ever believed I'd get. I wanted to hold on to the anger. It had fueled me for so long. But part of me also wanted to believe him. For the first time in my life, I was staring into the eyes of the man who'd given me half of who I was. We sat in silence, two men bound by blood, separated by time and pain. The air felt heavy with both hurt and possibility. After 25 years, the silence between father and son finally broke, and in its place stood a truth that changed everything. When I left Victor's apartment that night, the city lights blurred as I walked. Every step felt weighted with those 25 years of silence. The streets of New York buzzed around me, but inside, everything was still. I had met my father. He wasn't a ghost or some cruel absence. He was a man. Flawed, damaged, but still mine. Back at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. I wanted to hate him, and part of me still did, but another part, the part that had spent years searching for his face in my own reflection, wanted to believe him. His story didn't erase the pain, but it explained it. And for once, I had answers instead of questions. The next morning, I called my mother. My voice shook as I told her where I'd been. Mom, I said, I met him. I met Dad. He's alive. The line went quiet. Then I heard her sob, raw and unguarded. I knew this day would come, she whispered. You knew? I asked, my chest tightening. Yes, she admitted. He begged me to keep you safe. He promised that if he stayed away, they'd never find us. I believed him. I kept his secret because I thought it was the only way you could grow up free. Her words cut deep. I pictured her working those long nights, raising me alone, carrying the burden of silence for decades. I remembered the nights she held me when I cried, and the times she turned away when I asked about him. I saw now that the lie had broken something inside her too. You could have told me, I said, my voice softer than I expected. You didn't have to let me think he was dead. Her sobs quieted. I thought the lie would hurt less than the truth. I thought if you hated him, you wouldn't go looking for him. I thought I was protecting you. I closed my eyes. The anger I'd carried toward her began to shift. She hadn't lied to be cruel. She had lied because she was terrified and because she loved me. It didn't make what happened right, but it made it human. When I got back to Texas, our house felt smaller somehow, like the truth had squeezed itself into every corner. One evening, my mom and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had fought so many times over questions she refused to answer. This time, there was no silence. He told me everything, I said. About the fire, the danger, why he stayed away. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. And do you believe him? She asked. I hesitated, then spoke honestly. I want to. I think I do. But believing him doesn't erase the years he missed. It doesn't erase the pain. She looked at me with those tired eyes. I never wanted you to carry that pain, she said quietly. I thought I was sparing you. I reached across the table and took her hand. You gave me everything you could, Mom, I said softly. I see that now. But I needed the truth. Even if it hurt, I needed it. Then she broke. Tears ran freely down her cheeks. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same side, not separated by walls built of silence and secrets. In the weeks that followed, I spoke to Victor on the phone. At first, it was awkward, like talking to a stranger whose face looked exactly like mine. But slowly, stories began to flow. He told me about his childhood, the mistakes he'd made, the fire that nearly ended his life. He told me about years spent in exile, jobs under false names, and the constant fear that someone might connect him back to us. One evening, I asked the question that had haunted me for years. Did you ever think about coming back, even when it wasn't safe? His voice cracked. Every day, he admitted. I watched from a distance whenever I could. I saw your school photos through people I trusted. I saw you grow from a boy into a man, and it tore me apart not being there. But I told myself that if you lived free of my mistakes, it was worth it. I just never imagined you'd come knocking on my door one day. His honesty didn't erase the lost years, but it began to stitch something together inside me. For the first time, I felt like I could move forward, not as half a person, but as someone carrying the whole truth. The lesson wasn't neat. It wasn't simple forgiveness or perfect reconciliation. It was messy, raw, and painfully real. I learned that love can wound when twisted by fear. I learned that silence can protect, but it can also destroy. And I learned that sometimes, the truth isn't a clean answer. It's a jagged edge you have to learn to live with. One night, sitting alone in my room, I looked at a photo of my mom and me at my graduation. For years, I had wondered what my father would have looked like in that moment. Now I knew. I could never reclaim the years we lost, but I could carry them both with me. The mother who protected me with silence, and the father who sacrificed presence for safety. The story I grew up believing had been a lie, but the truth I found was far stronger. I wasn't a boy defined by absence anymore. I was a man who had faced the silence, broken it open, and found himself among the pieces. I share this story not to condemn, not to glorify, but to remind anyone listening that the truth, no matter how painful, is what sets you free. For 25 years, I carried the weight of silence, believing my father had died in a fire. What I found wasn't just a man. It was the truth, hidden from me all my life. Painful, complicated, messy, but it gave me something I'd never had before: answers. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own family, or reminded you that the truth, no matter how hard, is always worth seeking, I hope you'll take a moment to support this channel. Like the video if it spoke to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and comment below. I'd love to know how it made you feel, or if you've ever carried a secret or silence that shaped who you are. And if you want more stories like this, real stories about life, loss, truth, and the moments that change everything, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for listening to my story.